musicianship, all of those things I think should have an equal percentage sort of on the pie graph of this particular pursuit. So if you're practicing all the time, first of all, ask yourself, why are you avoiding reed making? And I've noticed that for most students that have experienced that, they're avoiding reed making either out of fear/insecurity or some form of laziness, right? Which is a type of resistance, which is probably still fear and insecurity at the end of the day, right? I think it always kind of goes back to that. So I think the issue there is in the oboe world in general, I've noticed sometimes that we have a tendency to speak about reed making in sort of a negative way. We have a tendency to talk about it like it's very, psychologically damaging, or a chore, for example, something you have to do so that you can do what it is you want to do. And I think that's a very unconscious thing in many of us, myself included in the past, for sure. So I think for those students, what I tell them is you have to figure out how to cultivate an enjoyment, a passion, a love for reed making as its own art form.
You have quite a recording career, Andy, and I was wondering if we could talk about some of those projects and maybe in respect to reeds, how you dealt with reed making for each of the wildly varying kinds of playing that you had to do. You have a CD entitled The Singing Oboe, which includes your beautiful interpretation of Schumann Lieder, and another album of Handel Trio Sonatas recorded with Nancy Ambrose King and your colleague Kristen Wolf Jensen. Then, of course, there's your Portraits and Music CD. So all that taken into consideration, did you have different reed approaches for each of those projects?
I would say yes and no. And I know that's a wonderfully vague response. This is a pretty complex thing to talk about. And so I'll start by saying that on the one hand, every time I'm making a reed, I'm just trying to make the best, most perfectly balanced reed possible. I'm not necessarily ever sitting down and thinking, all right, I'm going to make a reed for a concerto, in which you're going to need a reed that really, really projects. Every time I've had to play in front of an orchestra, it's very hard to feel like your tone is big enough. I'm making a reed to make it the best possible reed because I kind of believe, like with us as musicians and artists, the reed, there's already the best reed within that piece of cane, and it is our job to kind of remove the cane that is not that and reveal what is already within the reed. So that being said, I do think that at the end of the day, certain reeds, certain kind of pieces of cane, their ideal form ends up being suited for some things more than other things, right? Mm-hmm. I play principal oboe, as you mentioned, in the Quad City Symphony during the year, but then in the summer I play second oboe and English horn in the Music in the Mountains Festival in Durango, Colorado. And absolutely, I don't use the exact same kinds of reeds when I'm playing second oboe that I do when I'm playing principal oboe. Every once in a while, you may make one of those reeds that is just like kind of a one-size-fits-all, can kind of do anything. But I find those, at least in my experience, to be pretty rare. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, yes, I would say that as I was preparing for those 3 different recording projects, the reeds that I was kind of leaning towards using after I had made whatever the best form of that piece of cane was, ended up sort of gathering on one side of my reed case. And for the Schumann Schubert recording, I needed a reed for that was incredibly stable, incredibly warm, incredibly free-blowing, because I had to do a lot of soft playing in the middle and low middle register. And so I didn't, for that, need a reed that necessarily packed a lot of punch and had a lot of power to it. I needed something more subtle and delicate and refined. Actually, I'd say, oddly enough, the reeds I played for the Handel Trio Sonata album were somewhat similar to the Singing Oboe album. But what I did need for those reeds, as opposed to the Schumann reeds, was a little bit more sparkle and ring in them. So they needed to have a little bit more sort of lightness, and I'm going to use a potential trigger word here, brightness. One of the things I want to change about the oboe world is having, this kind of visceral negative reaction to the word bright. Yeah. Because, every time I ask a student, what do you want from a reed or an oboe? I want it to be dark, right? And it's like, okay, but I think the ideal is what I call the chiaroscuro, which is, that term from Baroque art of that sort of juxtaposition of intense lightness and intense darkness butted up against each other to create drama. That's what I think a reed needs. It's what Tabito said, right? The diamond sitting on the pillow. Yeah. But everybody just wants the pillow, but without the diamond, you can't fill a hall and you can't create an infinite spectrum of colors. So I needed more diamond in my reeds for the Handel. And for the last CD, you're talking about the portraits in oboe that I recorded with Courtney's wonderful colleagues, Ben Quaglio and Alan Huckleberry. That's where I needed a bigger variety of reeds, because there was a much greater variety of material we were playing. We were playing big, robust things that were a little more bombastic. We were playing subtle, delicate things. So I needed quite a range of reeds with different strengths, I would say.
Oh, I just love the way you describe the sound quality of the reed. That's such a difficult thing to talk about sometimes, but you just made it crystal clear what you're looking for in a great reed.
Well, yeah, I find that the ability to verbalize what we are doing as musicians, oboists, and reed makers, the ability to articulate these very sort of abstract things is its own art form that I want to try to master, because, we're trying to teach the next generation, and I want to be able to give them every possible tool to pursue this art form at whatever level they dream for themselves.
Speaking of training the next generation, if you could go back in time, do you have any reed making advice you'd give to a younger version of yourself?
It gets better. Yes, absolutely. Whenever anybody asks me this question about going back to give advice to my younger self, I always end up landing on this thought of really all I would tell my younger self is just keep doing what you're doing. Because, the struggles we all have, do we really want to prevent ourselves from going through those struggles when those were the very things that led us to where we are now, right? So I wouldn't want to say anything to my younger self that would maybe give anything away too soon. I don't want to spoil the journey, because the struggles and the tough times, even though, come on, we all of us have cried about reads probably many times. All of us have felt defeated. All of us have wanted to throw our hands up in the air and say, why the heck am I doing this? Because it's a very complex, challenging art form. It's not for the faint of heart. And, but once again, that was, for me at least, the very fire that tempered the metal of my soul, was those times of challenge and struggle. And if I hadn't been forced to go through them, I'm not sure I would have achieved what I have achieved and what I'm still trying to achieve.
Oh, that's great.
Very powerful.
Very poetic.
Yes, it took me a moment just letting that sink in. The delivery and tone.
Yeah.
Very good oration. Yes.
Awesome.
Well, Andrew Parker, thank you so much for being a guest today on Read Talk.
Oh, thank you both so much. This was really a pleasure.
And thanks to all of you for listening. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode.
We'd love to hear from you. Send your read-making questions for our guests to readtalkpodcast@gmail.com. Send in good vibes from our read desk to yours. I'm Courtney Miller.
And I'm Margaret Marco.